The dust cloud rose behind the departing train like a ghost saying goodbye, and Zelda Kingsley stood alone on the wooden platform with nothing but a battered leather suitcase at her feet and the foolish hope that somehow, somewhere in this God-forsaken wilderness, she could build a life worth living. The August heat of 1876 pressed down on Concord, California like a heavy blanket, making the air shimmer above the railroad tracks that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Zelda wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her dark hair already escaping the careful bun she had pinned that morning in Sacramento. Her cotton dress, once a respectable shade of deep blue, was wrinkled and dusty from the journey, and her boots were scuffed beyond recognition. She picked up the suitcase, feeling its weight drag at her shoulder, and turned to face the town that was supposed to be her fresh start. Concord was smaller than she had imagined. The main street stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings that looked like they had been thrown together in a hurry and left to weather the California sun. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a hotel with a crooked sign, and a few other establishments she could not quite make out from this distance. Dust devils danced between the buildings, and she could hear the distant sound of hammering, of horses, of life continuing without any regard for her arrival. She had nowhere to go. The telegram she had received 3 weeks ago from her Aunt Martha had promised a place to stay, a position helping in the boarding house Martha ran. But when Zelda had sent word of her arrival date, no response had come. Still, she had boarded the train anyway, leaving behind the suffocating expectations of her family in Boston, the humiliation of a broken engagement to a man who decided she was not refined enough for his ambitions, and the endless gray dreariness of a life that felt like it was slowly crushing her spirit. "Madam, you planning on standing there all day?" a voice called out. Zelda turned to see a young man approaching from the direction of the town, leading a horse by its reins. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work, and he wore the practical clothing of someone who spent his days under the sun. Worn denim pants, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. His face was tanned and angular, with sharp blue eyes that assessed her with curiosity rather than judgment. "I am waiting for someone," Zelda said, lifting her chin despite the uncertainty that gnawed at her insides. The man stopped a few feet away, pushing his hat back slightly. "Might be waiting a while. That was the last train through today, and I did not see anyone heading this way to meet it." His voice was pleasant, with a slight drawl that suggested he had spent time in Texas or somewhere further south. "I sent word to my aunt," Zelda insisted. "Martha Kingsley. She runs a boarding house here." The man's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his features. "Mrs. Kingsley passed on about 2 months back, madam. Fever took her quick. I am sorry to be the one telling you this." The world tilted slightly beneath Zelda's feet. She had not known her aunt well, had only met her twice as a child, but Martha had been her last hope, the single thread connecting her to a new life. Now that thread was severed, and she was standing in a town where she knew no one, with exactly $7.32 in her purse, and no plan whatsoever. "I see," she managed to say, though her voice sounded far away to her own ears. "Thank you for informing me." The man studied her for a long moment, then glanced down at her suitcase and back at her face. "You got anywhere else to go? Anyone else in town you know?" "No." The word came out more honestly than she intended. He was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that she could see forming behind his eyes. "Well, standing here is not going to help matters. Name's Preston James. I work a ranch about 5 miles outside town, and I was just coming in for supplies." The town has a hotel of sorts, though calling it that is generous. Mrs. Fletcher runs it, and she might have a room if you have coin." "I have some money," Zelda said quickly, not wanting him to think she was looking for charity. "And I can work. I can sew, cook, keep accounts. I am educated." Preston nodded slowly. "That is good. Concord is growing, and there is always need for people willing to work. But first things first. Let me help you get settled at the hotel, and then you can figure out your next steps." He reached down and picked up her suitcase before she could protest, testing its weight with an appreciative nod. "You pack light. That is practical." "It is all I have," Zelda admitted. He looked at her again, and this time there was something different in his gaze, something warm. "A suitcase and hope. That is more than a lot of folks start without here. That is all anyone really needs to make a go of it." Something about the way he said it, with such simple conviction, made the tightness in Zelda's chest ease just slightly. She fell into step beside him as he led his horse toward the main street, her shorter legs working to keep pace with his long stride. "Where are you from?" Preston asked as they walked. "Your accent is not from around here." "Boston," Zelda said. "And yes, before you ask, it is very different from this." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I imagine so. What brings a Boston lady all the way out to a dusty California town?" Zelda considered how much to tell him. "I needed a change. The life I was living was not the life I wanted to keep living." Preston glanced at her with what might have been respect. "That is honest. Most people dress it up prettier. I can appreciate plain speaking." They reached the main street, and Zelda could see the town more clearly now. It was rough, certainly, but there was an energy to it, a sense of possibility that Boston had long since lost beneath layers of tradition and expectation. Men in work clothes moved between buildings. A few women in practical dresses carried baskets, and the sound of a piano drifted from the saloon even though it was barely past noon. The hotel was a two-story building that leaned slightly to the left, with a painted sign that read "Fletcher's Rooms and Board." Preston tied his horse to the hitching post outside and carried her suitcase up the 3 steps to the covered porch. He held the door open for her, and Zelda stepped inside to find a small lobby with a desk, a few chairs, and stairs leading to the upper floor. A woman emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled back severely and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Preston James, what brings you into town on a Tuesday?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher. I need to get some supplies, but first I am helping this lady get situated. This is Miss Zelda Kingsley." She just arrived on the train, was supposed to meet her Aunt Martha, but she did not get word about Martha passing. Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened marginally. "That is a hard piece of news to arrive to. Martha was a good woman. You look like her around the eyes." She turned her attention fully to Zelda. "I have a room available, $3 a week, and that includes breakfast and supper. You will have to fend for yourself at midday, but there is a cafe down the street that serves decent food for reasonable prices." Zelda did a quick calculation in her head. At that rate, her money would last barely 2 weeks. She would need to find work immediately. "I will take the room, thank you. And I wanted to ask if you might know of anyone in town looking for help. I can sew, cook, keep books, teach reading and writing." Mrs. Fletcher considered this, her eyes shrewd. The schoolteacher position was filled last month, but Mrs. Hawkins at the general store mentioned needing someone to help with the accounts and minding the shop when she needs to see to other matters. Her arthritis has been acting up something fierce. Pay would not be much, but it would be steady. And Martha Chen, who runs the laundry, is always looking for help. That is harder work but pays a bit better. "I would be grateful if you could introduce me to Mrs. Hawkins," Zelda said. "I can take you over there after you get settled," Preston offered. "I need to stop by the general store anyway." Mrs. Fletcher pulled a key from a hook behind the desk and handed it to Zelda. "Room 4, top of the stairs and to the right. It is small but clean. I will hold supper until 6 o'clock. If you are not here by then, you miss it." "Thank you," Zelda said, taking the key. She followed Preston up the narrow stairs, acutely aware of how strange it was to be in this unfamiliar place with this unfamiliar man, yet feeling oddly safe. He set her suitcase down outside room 4 and stepped back to give her space. "I will wait downstairs," he said. "Take your time getting freshened up, and then we will go see about that job." Zelda unlocked the door and stepped into the small room. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand with a chipped basin and pitcher, a small table with one chair and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. A single window looked out over the main street. It was sparse, but it was clean as Mrs. Fletcher had promised, and for now it was hers. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, then unpinned her hair and repinned it more securely. She changed into a slightly less wrinkled dress, a practical gray cotton that she hoped would make her look employable, and took a moment to stare at her reflection in the small, spotted mirror above the washstand. Her face looked back at her, neither beautiful nor plain, with dark eyes that held more determination than she felt, and a mouth that her mother had always said was too wide and too prone to smiling. She was 23 years old, alone in a strange town, with almost no money and no prospects. By all rights, she should be terrified. But instead, standing in that small room with the sound of the California wind rattling the window frame, Zelda felt something unexpected: excitement. For the first time in years, her life was entirely her own to shape. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She went back downstairs to find Preston leaning against the front desk, chatting easily with Mrs. Fletcher about someone's new horse. He straightened when he saw her, and something in his expression made her self-conscious. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she confirmed. They stepped back out into the afternoon heat. Preston untied his horse and walked beside her, leading the animal by its reins. "The general store is just down here. Mrs. Hawkins is particular about things being done right, but she is fair. If she hires you, she will treat you square." "What about you?" Zelda asked. "You said you work a ranch, my family's ranch," Preston said. "My pa started it 20 years ago when he came out from Missouri. We run cattle mostly, some horses. My older brother Thomas manages most of it now since pa's back went bad, and I handle the day-to-day work along with 2 hired hands. It is a good life if you do not mind hard work and long days." "You like it?" Preston seemed surprised by the question. "I do. Never wanted to do anything else, really. There is something about working the land, raising animals, building something that will last. It feels worthwhile." They reached the general store, and Preston tied his horse outside. The interior was dim and crowded with goods: barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, tools hanging from the walls, jars of preserves on shelves, and 100 other items packed into the space. A woman stood behind the counter, marking something in a ledger. She looked up as they entered. "Preston James, twice in 1 month. What brings you back so soon?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Hawkins. I actually came to introduce you to someone. This is Miss Zelda Kingsley. She just arrived in town and is looking for work. Mrs. Fletcher mentioned you might need help with the accounts and minding the store." Mrs. Hawkins set down her pencil and studied Zelda with the same shrewd assessment that seemed common among the women in this town. She was perhaps 60, thin and wiry, with hands that showed the swelling of arthritis. "You know how to keep books?" "Yes, madam," Zelda said. I kept the household accounts for my family for 5 years, and I helped my father with his business ledgers when his clerk was ill. I can also help customers, stock shelves, and whatever else you might need. Can you manage sums in your head? Yes, madam. What is 7 times 13? 91. Mrs. Hawkins nodded approvingly. What about reading? Some of these labels are written in small print and my eyes are not what they used to be. Zelda picked up a nearby tin and read the label clearly. Baking powder, manufactured by Hoffman and Company, Philadelphia. When could you start? Tomorrow morning, if you would like. 6 days a week, 8 in the morning until 6 at night with an hour break at midday. $1.50 a week, plus you can take home any goods that are close to spoiling or slightly damaged. Fair. It was barely enough to cover her room with a little left over for food, but it was a start. Fair, Zelda agreed. Good, come tomorrow at 8 sharp. I will show you how I like things done. Mrs. Hawkins turned her attention to Preston. You here for supplies or just playing escort? Supplies, Preston said, pulling a list from his pocket. Thomas sent me with a whole list. We need flour, coffee, sugar, some nails, and a few other things. While Mrs. Hawkins and Preston discussed his order, Zelda wandered the store, looking at the goods on display. Everything was practical, necessary for survival in this place. There were no luxuries, no frivolous items. It was so different from the shops in Boston with their fancy displays and imported goods. Yet there was something honest about it that appealed to her. Preston finished his transaction and carried a heavy sack over his shoulder with apparent ease. I need to load this onto my horse and pick up a few more things, but then I am heading back to the ranch. Can I walk you back to the hotel? I would like to look around town a bit if you do not mind, Zelda said. I should know where things are. That is sensible. Preston shifted the sack slightly. I will be heading back to town in about a week for supplies again. If you need anything or if you have trouble, Mrs. Fletcher or Mrs. Hawkins can get word to me. Thank you, Zelda said, and she meant it sincerely. You have been very kind to a stranger. I appreciate it more than I can say. Preston looked slightly embarrassed. It is what anyone would do. Besides, you seem like the kind of person who will do just fine out here. You have got steel in you, I can tell. He tipped his hat to her and headed out to load his supplies. Zelda watched him go, surprised to find herself disappointed that he was leaving. There was something steady and reassuring about Preston James, something that made her feel less alone in this strange new world. She spent the next hour walking the length of the main street, memorizing the locations of important places. The cafe Mrs. Fletcher had mentioned, a small church at the far end of town, a blacksmith shop with the ring of hammer on anvil echoing from inside, the saloon with its painted sign and sounds of rough laughter, a dry goods store, and various other establishments. The town was rough around the edges, but people nodded to her as she passed, acknowledging her presence if not quite welcoming yet. When she returned to the hotel, she found Mrs. Fletcher in the small dining room setting the table for supper. Find everything you needed. Yes, thank you. And I found work. Mrs. Hawkins hired me at the general store. Mrs. Fletcher nodded approvingly. That is good. Fast work. You will do all right here, I think. Supper will be ready in about 20 minutes. We have 2 other guests staying right now, both traveling salesmen passing through. They are decent enough fellows, but I would not engage too much in conversation if I were you. They talk more than they listen. Supper was simple but filling. Beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, and dried apple pie for dessert. The 2 salesmen dominated the conversation, talking about their routes and their products with the enthusiasm of men who loved the sound of their own voices. Zelda ate quietly, exhausted from the long day and the emotional weight of all the changes. That night, Lying in the narrow bed in her small room, Zelda listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the California night. The wind in the eaves, the distant sound of the saloon piano, someone laughing, a dog barking, the creak of the building settling. She thought about Preston James and his simple statement, "A suitcase and hope, that is all anyone really needs." She had both those things, and tomorrow she would start building her new life. She fell asleep thinking about blue eyes and a kind voice, and did not let herself examine too closely why that thought was comforting. The next morning, Zelda presented herself at the general store at precisely 8 o'clock. Mrs. Hawkins was already there, sweeping the front steps. She nodded approvingly at Zelda's punctuality and ushered her inside. "First thing you need to learn is where everything is," Mrs. Hawkins said briskly. "Cannot help customers if you do not know what we have and where to find it. After that, I will show you the ledger system." The day passed in a blur of information. Zelda learned the layout of the store, the prices of common goods, how Mrs. Hawkins liked the shelves organized, and the intricacies of the account books. Some customers kept running accounts that were settled monthly. Others paid cash, and everything needed to be recorded carefully. By midday, when Mrs. Hawkins sent her off for her break, Zelda's head was spinning with details. She bought a simple lunch at the cafe, a sandwich and coffee for 15 cents, and sat at a small table by the window watching the town move around her. It was fascinating how much activity there was, how alive this small place felt. Men on horseback rode through, wagons came and went, people moved between buildings with purpose. It was a working town, a place where people were building something. The afternoon was busy with customers. Zelda found herself serving them under Mrs. Hawkins's watchful eye, measuring out flour and sugar, cutting fabric by the yard, finding tools and supplies. She made a few small mistakes, but Mrs. Hawkins corrected her patiently, and by the end of the day she felt she had a basic grasp of how things worked. "You did well, Mrs. Hawkins said as they closed up the store. "Tomorrow you can handle more on your own. You learn quick, and you are not afraid of hard work. That matters more than anything else out here." The days settled into a routine. Zelda worked 6 days a week at the store, learning more each day, becoming faster and more confident. Mrs. Hawkins's arthritis was clearly worse than she had let on, and Zelda found herself taking on more and more of the physical work, which the older woman accepted with visible relief. The customers began to recognize Zelda, to greet her by name, to accept her as part of the town's fabric. Sunday was her day off, and she spent it doing laundry, mending her clothes, and exploring the area around the town. She attended church services, sitting in the back row and listening to Reverend Thompson's earnest sermons about perseverance and faith. She wrote letters to her family in Boston, carefully neutral letters that mentioned her job and her room, but avoided discussing how she felt about any of it. A week after she had arrived, Preston James came back to town for supplies. Zelda was helping a customer when she saw him tie up his horse outside, and her heart did an unexpected flutter. She finished with the customer and tried to look busy organizing a shelf as Preston entered the store. "Morning, Mrs. Hawkins," he said, then his eyes found Zelda and his face brightened. "Miss Kingsley, how has your first week been?" "Busy," Zelda said, smiling despite herself. "But good. Mrs. Hawkins is an excellent teacher." "She is a demanding one anyway," Mrs. Hawkins said dryly. "Preston, your brother sent word about your order. I have it ready in the back." While Mrs. Hawkins went to get his supplies, Preston approached the counter where Zelda stood. "You look like you are settling in well." "I am trying to. It is very different from what I am used to, but I think I like it here." Zelda hesitated, then added, I wanted to thank you again for helping me that first day. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there." "You would have figured it out," Preston said with certainty. "You are resourceful, but I was glad to help." He paused, seeming to consider something. "There is a dance Saturday night at the town hall. The whole town comes out for it. Music, food, dancing. I was wondering if you might like to go." Zelda's heart beat faster. "Are you asking me to accompany you?" "I am, if you are willing. I know you do not know many people yet, and it would be a good way to meet folks, and I would enjoy the company." "I would like that," Zelda said, surprised by how much she meant it. Preston's smile was genuine and warm. "Good. I will come by the hotel around 7 on Saturday to collect you, if that suits." Mrs. Hawkins returned with a large box, and the moment passed as Preston paid for his supplies. But as he left, he glanced back at Zelda with a look that made her feel suddenly warm despite the cool morning. "That boy is sweet on you," Mrs. Hawkins observed once he was gone. "We barely know each other," Zelda protested. "Does not take long sometimes. Preston is a good man. His family is well respected around here. Could do worse than catching his eye." Zelda felt her cheeks warm. "I am not trying to catch anyone's eye. I am trying to build a life for myself." "Those things are not mutually exclusive," Mrs. Hawkins said practically. "But suit yourself. Just keep in mind that good men are not as common as rocks out here, and when you find one, it is worth paying attention." Saturday took forever to arrive. Zelda worked through the week with increasing anticipation, though she tried to tell herself it was just a dance, just a social event, nothing more. But she found herself thinking about Preston at odd moments, remembering the way he had looked at her, the kindness in his voice, the strength in his shoulders as he had carried her suitcase. She had one good dress, a deep green cotton with a modest neckline and long sleeves that she had packed carefully at the bottom of her suitcase. Saturday afternoon, she finished work early, went back to her room, and spent extra time getting ready. She washed her hair in the basin, dried it as best she could, and pinned it up in a softer style than her usual severe bun. The green dress fit well, emphasizing her small waist and bringing out the color in her eyes. When Preston knocked on her door at 7 o'clock precisely, Zelda felt suddenly nervous. She opened the door to find him standing there in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed, his hat in his hands. He looked at her and his eyes widened slightly. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Zelda managed. "You look very nice too." They walked together through the warm evening air to the town hall, a large wooden building at the center of town. Music was already spilling out into the street, the lively sound of a fiddle and a piano playing together. Inside, lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd. It seemed like the entire town had turned out. Tables along the walls held food and drinks, and the center of the floor was already filled with dancing couples. Preston introduced Zelda to what felt like dozens of people. Ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the blacksmith and his family, the doctor, the schoolteacher. Everyone was friendly, welcoming, curious about the new woman in town. Zelda tried to remember names and faces, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. "Would you like to dance?" Preston asked when there was finally a break in the introductions. "I should warn you that I am not very practiced," Zelda admitted. "We did not dance much in my family." "That is all right. I will lead and you just follow. It is not fancy dancing, just simple steps." He led her onto the floor and took her hand in his other hand resting lightly at her waist. The touch sent awareness shooting through her. He was warm and solid, and when he began to move, guiding her through the steps of a simple reel, she found it was not as difficult as she had feared. She stumbled a few times, but Preston was patient, and soon she was moving with more confidence. "You are a natural," he said, smiling down at her. "You are a good teacher," she countered. They danced several more dances, and between them, Preston brought her punch and introduced her to more people. His brother Thomas was there with his wife Margaret and their 2 young children, and Thomas had the same kind eyes as Preston but a more serious demeanor. "So you are the woman who has my brother making extra trips to town," Thomas said with a teasing grin. Preston looked embarrassed. "I had supplies to get." "You always have supplies to get, but you usually do not look that pleased about it," Margaret added, her eyes twinkling. She turned to Zelda. "It is nice to meet you. Preston mentioned you at supper every night this week." "Margaret," Preston said, his ears turning red. Zelda could not help but laugh. There was something charming about seeing this confident man flustered. "It is nice to meet both of you too." As the evening wore on, Zelda found herself relaxing, enjoying the music and the company and the simple pleasure of being part of a community celebration. Preston was attentive without being overbearing, and she found herself laughing more than she had in months. When they danced a slower waltz near the end of the evening, he held her a bit closer, and she let herself lean into his strength. "I am glad you came to Concord," Preston said quietly as they swayed to the music. "So am I," Zelda admitted. "I was terrified when I first arrived, but now I think maybe this is exactly where I needed to be." "Sometimes the best things happen when we are scared," Preston said. "Sometimes we have to leave everything behind to find what we have been looking for." "What have you been looking for?" Zelda asked. Preston looked down at her, his blue eyes serious. "I did not know until I saw you standing on that train platform, but I think maybe I have been looking for someone who understands that starting over takes courage, someone who is not afraid to hope even when everything seems uncertain." Zelda's breath caught. "Preston, I know it is fast," he said. "I know we barely know each other, but I have never felt like this before, Zelda. From the moment I saw you, something just felt right, like maybe we were supposed to meet that day." "I feel it too," Zelda whispered. "It terrifies me, but I feel it too." The music ended, and around them people began gathering their families and preparing to leave. Preston walked Zelda back to the hotel through the cool night air, their hands brushing occasionally in a way that felt both accidental and intentional. At the hotel steps, Preston paused. "Can I see you again? I mean, outside of town dances and me coming in for supplies." "I would like that very much." "I will come to town next Sunday. Maybe we could have lunch together, take a walk." "That sounds perfect." Preston lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Zelda." "Good night, Preston." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure eventually disappearing from view. When she went inside, Mrs. Fletcher was sitting in the lobby with a knowing smile. "Good evening," the older woman asked. "Wonderful evening," Zelda said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "That is what I thought. You have got the look of a woman who has just realized something important." Zelda climbed the stairs to her room, her heart full of a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time. It was hope, but deeper than that. It was the sense that maybe, just maybe, all the upheaval and uncertainty had been worth it to bring her to this place, to this moment, to this man who looked at her like she was something precious. The weeks that followed established a pattern that became precious to Zelda. She worked at the general store 6 days a week, learning the business thoroughly and taking on more responsibility as Mrs. Hawkins increasingly trusted her judgment. The older woman's arthritis continued to worsen, and there were days when Zelda essentially ran the store herself, making decisions about orders and inventory, handling difficult customers, managing the accounts. Preston came to town every Sunday without fail. Sometimes he brought his brother's family, sometimes he came alone, but he always made time to see Zelda. They would have lunched together at the cafe, then walk through the town or out along the road that led to the surrounding countryside. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering each other's histories, dreams, fears, and hopes. Zelda learned that Preston was 26 years old, the younger of two brothers. His mother had died when he was 12, and he had helped his father build the ranch from almost nothing into a thriving operation. He loved the land with a fierce passion, loved the work despite its hardships, and dreamed of someday expanding the ranch to include more acres and better stock. Preston learned that Zelda was the middle child of 5, caught between 2 older sisters who had married well and 2 younger brothers who were being groomed to take over their father's shipping business. She had been educated beyond what was typical for women, having convinced her father to let her attend lectures at Harvard through a special program. She loved books and ideas, craved independence, and had broken her engagement because she could not face a life of being merely ornamental in someone else's story. "Your family must have been upset when you left," Preston said one Sunday as they sat by a creek a mile outside of town. "My mother was horrified. My father was disappointed, but I think secretly a bit proud. My sisters could not understand why I would give up a comfortable life. My brothers did not care one way or another." Zelda tossed a pebble into the water, watching the ripples spread. "I tried to explain that I would rather struggle on my own terms than live comfortably on someone else's, but they could not grasp that concept." "I understand it," Preston said. "That is how my pa felt when he came west. He had a decent job working for a railroad company back in Missouri, but he wanted to build something that was his, even if it meant starting from nothing." "Do you ever want something different? Something beyond the ranch?" Preston considered this. "I want the ranch to grow, to thrive, to become something my children and grandchildren can build on. But the work itself, the life itself, no. I cannot imagine being happy doing anything else." "Does that seem limited to you?" "Not at all," Zelda said honestly. "I think knowing what you want and pursuing it wholeheartedly is the opposite of limited. I envy your certainty." "You seem pretty certain to me. You came all the way across the country to start over. That takes a lot of conviction." "Or desperation," Zelda said wryly. "No," Preston said firmly. "Desperation would have been staying in a life that made you miserable. What you did was brave." These conversations, these quiet moments beside the creek or walking down dusty roads, became the foundation of something deeper than attraction. Zelda found in Preston a partner who valued her mind as much as her company, who listened when she talked about ideas and dreams, who never made her feel like she should be less than she was. Preston found in Zelda a woman who challenged him in the best ways, who asked questions that made him think more deeply about his choices and his life, who was not afraid of hard work or hardship. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was fascinating. Every time they talked, he discovered new depths to her. As autumn arrived, painting the California hills in shades of gold and brown, their relationship deepened. Preston began staying in town overnight when he came on Sundays, taking a room at the hotel so he could spend more time with Zelda. They attended church together, had Sunday supper together, sat on the hotel porch in the evenings talking while the town settled into darkness around them. Mrs. Hawkins watched this development with approval. "I told you he was a good man," she said one Monday morning. "Are you going to marry him?" "He has not asked me," Zelda pointed out, though her heart beat faster at the thought. "He will. That boy looks at you like you are water in the desert. Mark my words, he will ask soon." That same week, Zelda received a letter from her mother. It was the first direct communication she had received from Boston since leaving, and she opened it with trepidation. The letter was cold and formal, informing Zelda that her younger brother Jonathan was getting married at Christmas, and the family expected her to attend. There was no warmth, no inquiry about how she was doing, no acknowledgement of the months that had passed. Just the expectation that she would return to Boston for this family obligation. Zelda read the letter twice, feeling the familiar weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her even from thousands of miles away. She showed it to Preston that Sunday. He read it carefully, then handed it back to her. "What do you want to do?" "I do not want to go," Zelda said honestly. "That life, those people, even though they are my family, they feel like strangers to me now. Is that terrible?" "No," Preston said. "It is honest. You have built a new life here. You do not owe anyone the right to pull you back into a life that made you unhappy. My mother will be furious. Your mother is not living your life. You are." Zelda took a deep breath and made her decision. That evening, she wrote a brief reply declining the invitation, wishing her brother well, and making it clear that she would not be returning to Boston. She posted the letter the next morning before she could second-guess herself. In early October, Mrs. Hawkins called Zelda into the back room of the store one afternoon when business was slow. The older woman looked tired, and there were lines of pain around her mouth that spoke of how much she was hurting. "I need to talk to you about something important, Mrs. Hawkins said, settling into a chair with visible relief. "My arthritis is getting worse. The doctor says I need to stop working so much, rest my hands and joints. My daughter in San Francisco has been asking me to come live with her for months now, and I think it is time I went." Zelda felt a pang of worry. "What will happen to the store?" "That is what I want to talk to you about. I have been thinking about selling it. The building, the inventory, everything. I have had a few offers from businessmen in Sacramento, but I do not like the idea of some stranger coming in and changing everything." Mrs. Hawkins paused, studying Zelda's face. "You know this business now. You run it as well as I do, maybe better in some ways. If you wanted to buy it, I would sell it to you for a fair price, let you pay it off over time." Zelda's mind reeled. Own the store. It was an incredible opportunity but also a huge responsibility. "Mrs. Hawkins, I do not have that kind of money." "I know you do not. But I have been thinking about this. The store brings in good money, more than enough to make payments on a loan and still live on. I would ask for $200 upfront, and then $50 a quarter until the full price of $800 is paid. You would own the building and all the stock, and you would have a secure income." $800 was a fortune, but Mrs. Hawkins was right that the store's profits could cover the payments. Zelda did a quick calculation in her head. She had saved nearly $30 from her wages over the past months, but $200 upfront was still far out of reach. "I do not have $200, Zelda said regretfully. "I wish I did. This would be an amazing opportunity." "Talk to Preston," Mrs. Hawkins suggested. "Maybe he could loan you the money, or maybe you two could work something out together." Zelda felt her cheeks warm. "I could not ask him for money. That would not be proper. Proper is one thing, practical is another, but suit yourself. Just think about it. I am not moving until December, so you have some time to figure it out." That Sunday, Zelda told Preston about Mrs. Hawkins's offer. They were walking along the creek, the autumn air cool and pleasant. Preston listened carefully, not interrupting, his face thoughtful. "It is an incredible opportunity," he said when she finished. "You would own your own business, be completely independent." "Is that what you want?" "I think so," Zelda said. "I mean, it is frightening to think about, but also exciting. But the money, Preston, I do not have anywhere near enough." Preston was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. Then he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I have money saved. Not a fortune, but enough. I could loan you the $200 for the down payment." "Preston, no, I could not ask you to do that." You are not asking. I am offering. Zelda, listen to me. These past months with you have been the best of my life. I think about you all the time. I count the days until Sunday when I can see you again. I have been trying to figure out the right way to say this the right time, but maybe there is no perfect moment. I love you. I am in love with you, and I want to spend my life with you. Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Preston, let me finish. I know we have not known each other long, just a few months really. But sometimes you just know, and I know. You are the person I want beside me for the rest of my life. So here is what I am thinking. Marry me. We buy the store together, make it ours. You run it because you are brilliant at it and you love it. I keep working the ranch because it is what I know and love. We build a life together, here in Concord, combining what we each bring to it. You want to get married, Zelda whispered. More than I have ever wanted anything. I know it is not the life you might have had in Boston, not the comfort and ease. It will be hard work, and some years will be harder than others. But it will be ours, Zelda. Our life, our choices, our future. A suitcase and hope, remember. We will build something real and good from those simple things. Tears were streaming down Zelda's face. I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too much, but I love you, Preston. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and when he kissed her, it was gentle and tender and full of promise. Zelda kissed him back, tasting salt from her own tears, feeling like her heart might burst from the sheer, overwhelming joy of this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Preston smiled down at her. So we are really doing this. Getting married, buying the store, building a life together. We are really doing this, Zelda confirmed. They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans as they went. They would marry as soon as possible, maybe in a month. That would give them time to make arrangements and for Zelda to finalize the purchase of the store with Mrs. Hawkins. Preston would talk to Thomas about adjusting his responsibilities at the ranch to allow him to spend more time in town. They would live in the rooms above the store, which Mrs. Hawkins had been using as storage but could be converted into a home. The news spread through Concord like wildfire. Mrs. Fletcher clapped her hands together with delight when Zelda told her. Mrs. Hawkins smiled her rare smile and said she had known it would work out. Thomas and Margaret offered to host an engagement supper at the ranch. The whole town seemed pleased by the news, this happy ending for the woman who had arrived alone with nothing but a suitcase, and the cowboy who had seen past the uncertainty to the hope beneath. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Zelda and Preston met with Mrs. Hawkins to work out the details of the store purchase. Preston provided the $200 down payment, and they signed papers making them equal partners in the business. Mrs. Hawkins began teaching Zelda the final details she needed to know about suppliers and ordering, preparing her to take over completely. Margaret helped Zelda sew a wedding dress, a simple but beautiful creation in cream-colored silk that Margaret had been saving. The women of the town donated lace for the trim and ribbons for her hair. It was nothing like the elaborate gown Zelda would have had in Boston, but it was more meaningful because it represented the community that had welcomed her. Preston worked with Thomas to rearrange his ranch duties. Thomas would take on more of the daily operations, while Preston would still help with major decisions and the heavy seasonal work like roundups and branding. It meant Preston would be able to spend most nights in town with Zelda, riding out to the ranch several times a week to check on things. The wedding was set for the first Sunday in November. The ceremony would be at the church, with a reception at the town hall afterward. It would be simple and small by Boston standards, but that suited both Zelda and Preston perfectly. The night before the wedding, Zelda sat in her hotel room thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few months. If someone had told her back in Boston that she would end up in a small California town, married to a cowboy, owning a general store, she would have thought they were mad. Yet here she was, and she had never been happier or more certain of anything in her life. There was a soft knock on her door. When Zelda opened it, she found Margaret standing there with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I know it is bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding, but no one said anything about the sister-in-law," Margaret said with a smile. "I wanted to give you this." Zelda invited her in and unwrapped the package to find a beautiful shawl, hand-knitted in a pattern of delicate leaves. "Margaret, this is beautiful." It was Preston's mother's. She knitted it herself. "I thought you might like to wear it tomorrow, something to connect you to the family you are joining." Margaret's eyes were warm. "I am so glad Preston found you, Zelda. He is a good man, but he has been lonely for a long time without really knowing it. You have brought him to life in a way I have not seen since we were children." "He has done the same for me," Zelda said honestly. "I was existing before, not really living. He makes me want to be brave, to take risks, to believe in good things." "That is what love should do," Margaret agreed. "I am happy to have you as a sister." The two women embraced, and Zelda felt another piece of her new life clicking into place. She was not just marrying Preston. She was joining a family, becoming part of something larger than herself. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and cool, perfect November weather. Mrs. Fletcher helped Zelda dress, arranging her hair in an elegant updo and draping the cream silk dress carefully over her frame. The shawl from Preston's mother completed the outfit, and when Zelda looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked happy. She looked ready. The church was packed when Zelda arrived. It seemed like the entire town had turned out for the wedding. Flowers from the last of the autumn gardens decorated the simple space, and someone had tied ribbons to the ends of the pews. Reverend Thompson stood at the front, smiling his kind smile. And Preston stood there waiting for her, looking handsome in a new suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love that Zelda felt tears threatening. Thomas stood beside him as best man, and Margaret waited near the front to serve as Zelda's attendant, since she had no family there. Mrs. Fletcher walked Zelda down the aisle, the older woman having offered to stand in for Zelda's absent father. As they approached the front, Preston stepped forward to take Zelda's hand, his grip warm and solid and sure. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You look pretty good yourself," she whispered back, making him smile. Reverend Thompson began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the church as he spoke about love and commitment, about two people joining their lives together, about faith and hope and the future. Zelda barely heard the words, too focused on Preston's face, on the feel of his hand holding hers, on the reality that this was actually happening. When it came time for the vows, Preston spoke clearly, his voice steady and certain. "I, Preston Alexander James, take you, Zelda Marie Kingsley, to be my wife. I promise to love you, support you, challenge you, and stand beside you in all things. I promise to be your partner in building the life we both want. I promise to honor your strength and your dreams. I will love you for the rest of my life, through whatever comes." Zelda's voice was less steady, emotion making it waver, but she spoke from her heart. "I, Zelda Marie Kingsley, take you, Preston Alexander James, to be my husband. I promise to love you, respect you, support your dreams, and build a life with you. I promise to be brave enough to hope, to take chances, to believe in the future we will create together. I will love you for the rest of my life, with everything I am." Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and when Preston kissed her, The church erupted in applause and cheers. Zelda kissed him back, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the sheer joy of the moment. The reception at the town hall was lively and warm. There was food that various families had contributed, music from the same fiddle player and pianist who had played at the dance where everything had begun, and genuine happiness from everyone present. Zelda danced with Preston, with Thomas, with several of the other men in town. Preston danced with Margaret, with Mrs. Hawkins despite her arthritis, with Mrs. Fletcher. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows, Preston pulled Zelda outside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the steps of the town hall, looking out at the street where they had first walked together months ago. "Happy?" Preston asked. "Happier than I have ever been," Zelda said honestly. "I keep thinking about that first day, standing on the train platform with my suitcase, so scared and uncertain. I had no idea that everything I needed was about to walk into my life." "I remember seeing you there," Preston said. "You looked lost but determined, scared but strong. I knew right then that you were going to be important. I did not know how, but I knew." "A suitcase and hope," Zelda murmured, echoing his words from that day. "You were right. That was all I needed, that and you." "That and us," Preston corrected, pulling her close. "We are in this together now. Everything we build together." They went back inside to rejoin the celebration, but Zelda carried that moment with her, the simple perfection of standing beside her husband, looking out at the life they were beginning to build. That night, they climbed the stairs to the rooms above the general store, their new home. Preston had spent the past week getting it ready, cleaning out the storage and bringing in furniture. It was small but cozy, with a bedroom, a sitting room, and a small kitchen. Mrs. Hawkins had left behind a few pieces of furniture, and Margaret had contributed curtains and bedding. "Welcome home, Mrs. James," Preston said, carrying Zelda over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "Welcome home, Mr. James," Zelda replied. That night, in the privacy of their new home, they came together as husband and wife. Preston was gentle and patient, and Zelda discovered that the physical intimacy of marriage was both overwhelming and wonderful. They made love slowly, learning each other, creating a new level of connection that felt sacred and profound. Afterward, lying in Preston's arms, Zelda felt a peace she had never known before. This was where she belonged. This was home. The months that followed were an adjustment but a happy one. Zelda took over full operation of the store when Mrs. Hawkins left for San Francisco in early December. It was challenging running the business on her own, but Preston helped when he could, and Zelda discovered she had a talent for it. She expanded the stock slightly, bringing in a few items that the women in town had mentioned wanting. She negotiated better prices with some of the suppliers. She made the store not just a place to buy necessities, but a gathering spot where people could catch up on news and socialize. Preston split his time between the ranch and the store, helping Zelda with heavy lifting and deliveries, managing the accounts with her, and riding out to check on the cattle and horses several times a week. It was a balancing act, but they made it work because they were doing it together. Their first Christmas as a married couple was simple but joyful. They spent Christmas Eve with Thomas, Margaret, and the children at the ranch, then returned to town for Christmas Day service at the church. Preston gave Zelda a beautiful leather-bound journal for her to record her thoughts and their life together. Zelda gave Preston a new hat that she had special ordered from San Francisco, much finer than his work hat but practical enough for daily wear. Winter in California was mild compared to Boston, but there were still cold nights when Zelda was grateful for the warmth of the pot-bellied stove in their sitting room and Preston's body beside her in bed. They developed routines and rhythms, learning each other's habits and preferences, sometimes disagreeing but always working through it. In February, Zelda realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then went to see Dr. Morrison, the town's physician. He confirmed what she had suspected. She was with child. Zelda walked back to the store in a daze, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. A baby. She and Preston were going to have a baby. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. She had no experience with infants, had never really thought much about motherhood back in her Boston life. But now, the idea of a child, a little person who was part of her and part of Preston, filled her with fierce joy. Preston had ridden out to the ranch that morning to help with some fence repair. Zelda spent the day at the store trying to focus on work but constantly distracted by the news she was carrying. When Preston returned that evening, dusty and tired, she met him at the door. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hands. Preston immediately looked concerned. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is very right." Zelda took a breath. "I saw Dr. Morrison today. Preston, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Preston just stared at her, processing the information. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried down the entire street. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down quickly, looking worried. "Sorry, should I not have done that? Is that safe? Are you all right?" Zelda laughed. "I am fine. The doctor says I am perfectly healthy and everything looks normal. The baby should come in late September or early October." Preston pulled her into a careful embrace, his hand gentle on her back. "A baby. Zelda, we are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Zelda said, meaning it completely. That night, they lay in bed talking about the future with a new dimension. They would need to prepare the spare room as a nursery. They would need to order supplies. They would need to figure out how Zelda would manage the store as her pregnancy advanced and after the baby came. But underneath, the practical concerns was a current of excitement and joy. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" Preston asked, his hand resting lightly on Zelda's stomach. "I do not know. Do you have a preference?" "Not even a little bit. Healthy is all I care about. Healthy baby, healthy wife, that is all that matters." As spring arrived, bringing wildflowers to the California hills and warming the air, Zelda's pregnancy became obvious. She let out the seams of her dresses, then eventually had to make new ones with more room. The women of the town rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and stories of their own pregnancies. Margaret was especially helpful, having been through it twice herself. "The first few months after the baby comes are the hardest," Margaret confided one afternoon when she had come to town for supplies. "You are exhausted all the time, and it feels like all you do is feed the baby and change diapers. But then they smile at you, really smile, and it makes everything worth it." "I am a bit terrified," Zelda admitted. "What if I am not good at being a mother?" "You will be good at it because you love this baby already and you will figure out what they need. All babies really need is to be fed, kept clean and warm and loved. You can do all of those things." By summer, Zelda had to accept that she could no longer manage the store on her own. The pregnancy was making her tired, and standing on her feet all day was becoming difficult. Preston suggested hiring someone to help, at least until after the baby came and Zelda recovered. They hired a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, 19 years old and sharp as a tack. She learned quickly and was good with customers, and Zelda felt comfortable leaving her in charge for hours at a time. This allowed Zelda to rest more, which Dr. Morrison said was important. Preston became even more protective as Zelda's due date approached. He hated leaving her to go to the ranch, always worried that something would happen while he was gone. Zelda found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one evening when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry for her. "I know, but humor me. I just want to take care of you." "You do take care of me. You take wonderful care of me. But Preston, I am still capable of doing things. I need to move around, stay active. The doctor said so." They compromised. Preston let Zelda do reasonable activities, but took over the truly heavy work. And Zelda accepted his help more gracefully, recognizing that it came from a place of love and concern. In late September, Zelda woke in the middle of the night with a sharp pain in her lower back. She lay still for a moment, wondering if she had just slept wrong, but then another pain came, wrapping around her middle like a band tightening. "Preston," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Preston, wake up." He was awake instantly, years of ranching making him alert. "What is it? What is wrong?" "I think the baby is coming." Preston was out of bed immediately, pulling on his pants and boots. "I will get Dr. Morrison. Margaret said she would come when your time came, so I will get her too. You stay here, do not move." "Preston, I am not going anywhere," Zelda said, trying to smile despite the growing discomfort. "But yes, please get them both." He kissed her forehead quickly and was gone, his boots pounding down the stairs and out into the street. Zelda heard him calling for help, and within minutes, lights were appearing in windows up and down the street. Dr. Morrison arrived first, his medical bag in hand, calm and professional. Margaret came soon after, having ridden into town with Preston. She shooed Preston out of the bedroom despite his protests. "This is women's work," Margaret said firmly. "You go downstairs and boil water and wait." "But I want to be with her," Preston argued. "Preston, I will be fine," Zelda managed between contractions. "Go, Margaret and Dr. Morrison will take care of me." Reluctantly, Preston left. Zelda could hear him pacing downstairs, and the sound was oddly comforting. He was there just below, ready if she needed him. The labor lasted through the rest of the night and into the morning. It was harder and more painful than Zelda had imagined, despite all the warnings she had received. There were moments when she did not think she could continue, when the pain was so overwhelming that she wanted to give up. But Margaret held her hand and wiped her forehead and told her she could do this. She was strong enough. It would be over soon and she would have her baby. Just after dawn, with the morning light streaming through the bedroom window, Zelda gave one final push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of silence, and then a loud, angry cry filled the room. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Zelda fell back against the pillows, exhausted and overwhelmed. Margaret was crying and smiling at the same time. Dr. Morrison cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Zelda's arms. Zelda looked down at her son and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He was tiny and red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on her face. She touched his little hand, and his fingers immediately curled around hers with surprising strength. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. I am your mother." Margaret went to the door and called down the stairs. "Preston, you can come up now." Preston took the stairs 3 at a time. He burst into the room, his eyes wild with worry, then stopped when he saw Zelda sitting up in bed, holding the baby. His expression transformed into something Zelda knew she would remember for the rest of her life, pure wonder and love. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Zelda said. "Perfect. Come meet your son." Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. When the infant yawned, revealing a tiny pink mouth, Preston let out a shaky laugh. He is so small. I did not realize they started out this small. He is actually a good size, Dr. Morrison said. Maybe 8 pounds. Healthy lungs, good color. You have a fine boy here. Preston reached out tentatively and touched the baby's cheek with one finger. He is perfect. Zelda, he is absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Zelda asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Preston thought for a moment, then said, "What about Matthew? It means gift of God, and he feels like a gift to me." "Matthew James," Zelda said, trying it out. "I love it. Hello, Matthew." Dr. Morrison and Margaret left them alone, saying they would be back later to check on everyone. Preston climbed onto the bed beside Zelda, and they sat together, looking down at their son, marveling at the tiny person they had created. "Thank you," Preston said quietly. "For what? For this. For him. For building this life with me. A year ago, I could not have imagined this moment. I could not have imagined being this happy." "Neither could I," Zelda admitted. "When I stepped off that train with my suitcase, I was hoping just to survive, to find a way to get by. I never dreamed I would find this, all of this." Preston kissed her temple gently. "A suitcase and hope. That is what you had, and look what we built from it. A home, a business, a marriage, and now a family. If that is not proof that hope is worth holding on to, I do not know what is." Matthew stirred in Zelda's arms and began to fuss. Margaret had shown Zelda before she left how to feed the baby, and now Zelda awkwardly positioned him to nurse. It felt strange and uncomfortable at first, but then Matthew latched on and began to eat with determined focus, and Zelda felt a rush of tender protectiveness. Preston watched in fascination. "That is amazing. You are amazing." The next weeks were an exhausting blur. Matthew was a good baby overall, but he still needed to be fed every few hours, changed constantly, and held when he cried. Zelda was tired in a way she had never experienced before, a bone-deep exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. But Preston was there, helping with everything he could. He changed diapers without complaint, walked Matthew around the room when he would not settle, brought Zelda meals, and made sure she was eating and drinking enough. Sarah managed the store with occasional input from Zelda, and the business continued to run smoothly. Margaret visited often, bringing food and offering advice and giving Zelda breaks so she could rest. Thomas came too, bringing supplies and news from the ranch. The whole family had embraced Matthew with love and excitement, and little by little, Zelda learned how to be a mother. By the time Matthew was 3 months old, life had settled into a new normal. Zelda was back working at the store part-time, bringing Matthew with her and keeping him in a basket behind the counter where customers could admire him. He was growing fast, becoming more alert and interactive, smiling at everyone who cooed at him. Preston had adjusted his ranch work to spend even more time in town, taking on a larger role in the store so Zelda did not have to work as much. They were partners in every sense, sharing the work of the business and the work of raising their son. The winter was mild again, and they celebrated Matthew's first Christmas with joy. He was 4 months old, fascinated by the decorations and the candles and all the attention from his extended family. Preston's father, whose back had improved slightly, came to town to meet his grandson, and his gruff exterior melted the moment Matthew grabbed his finger. "You have done well," Preston's father told his son. "Built a good life here. Your mother would be proud." As 1878 arrived, Zelda reflected on how much had changed in just over a year. She owned a successful business. She had a husband she loved deeply. She had a son who was healthy and thriving. She had a community that had embraced her as one of their own. The life she was living was nothing like the one she had imagined for herself back in Boston, but it was better in every way that mattered. The years continued to unfold with the rhythm of seasons and the growth of their family. When Matthew was 2 years old, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier because she knew what to expect, and in the summer of 1879, she gave birth to a daughter they named Emily. Emily was different from Matthew from the start, more demanding and vocal, with a temper that made Preston laugh and say she took after her mother. Zelda protested this, but secretly she was pleased that her daughter had spirit. The world was not easy on women, and Emily would need that fire. The store continued to thrive. Zelda had expanded the inventory and negotiated contracts with several ranches to supply them with goods, creating a reliable income stream. She hired 2 more people to help Sarah, allowing her to focus on the business side and spend more time with her children. Preston had finally convinced Thomas to hire additional ranch hands, freeing Preston to spend most of his time in town. He still rode out to the ranch several times a week, often taking Matthew with him as the boy got older. Matthew loved the animals and the wide, open spaces, and Preston was teaching him about ranching just as his own father had taught him. In 1881, when Matthew was 4 and Emily was 2, tragedy struck. Preston's father died suddenly of a heart attack while working on the ranch. The funeral was well attended, the old man having been respected in the community. Preston grieved deeply, regretting that his father had not had more time to watch his grandchildren grow. Thomas inherited the main ranch, but he insisted on making Preston a co-owner, acknowledging all the work Preston had put in over the years. The brothers renegotiated their arrangement again, with Preston taking on more decision-making responsibilities for the ranch while still maintaining his life in town. It meant busier schedules for everyone, but the James family was used to hard work. That same year, Zelda received a letter from her younger sister Catherine. It was the first real communication she had received from her family in years. Catherine wrote that she had left her own unsatisfying marriage and was living in San Francisco, working as a secretary. She asked tentatively if she might visit Zelda in Concord. Zelda wrote back immediately, inviting Catherine to come. When her sister arrived a month later, stepping off the train with a small bag and a nervous expression, Zelda barely recognized her. The confident, conventional young woman she remembered had been replaced by someone who looked weary but determined. "I finally understood what you did," Catherine said after they had caught up on the basics. "Why you left. I thought you were running away, but you were running towards something. I am trying to do the same thing now." Catherine stayed for a week, meeting Preston and the children, seeing the store and the life Zelda had built. On her last evening, she sat on the porch with Zelda while Preston put the children to bed. "You are happy," Catherine observed. "Really, truly happy. I can see it in everything about you." "I am," Zelda confirmed. "It is not an easy life and there are hard days, but it is my life, Catherine. Mine and Preston's. We chose this and we work at it, and it is worth every bit of effort." "I hope I can find something like this," Catherine said wistfully. "You will. Just keep being brave enough to try." As Matthew started school and Emily grew into a curious, energetic child who got into everything, Zelda sometimes thought about the young woman who had stepped off the train 7 years earlier with nothing but a suitcase and hope. That woman had been scared and uncertain, unsure if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Now, watching Preston teach Matthew how to rope fence posts, while Emily helped by tangling herself in the extra rope, listening to their laughter and feeling the warm California sun on her face, Zelda knew without any doubt that she had made the right choice. Every choice after that first brave one had led her here, to this life, to this family, to this profound happiness. In 1883, Zelda gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel. Preston joked that they were working on their own ranch crew, but his eyes were tender when he held his new son. Matthew and Emily were fascinated by the baby, wanting to help with everything. The store was now firmly established as the most successful business in Concord. Zelda had paid off the entire purchase price 2 years ahead of schedule and was making improvements, expanding the building to add more space. She employed 6 people and was considering opening a second location in a nearby town. Preston handled the ranch's accounts and supply orders while Zelda managed the retail side. Life was busy, sometimes overwhelmingly so, but it was good. Preston and Zelda had learned to work as a team, dividing responsibilities and supporting each other through challenges. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, taking occasional rides out to the creek where they had spent so many Sundays courting, keeping their connection strong. The years continued to pass. Matthew grew into a thoughtful boy who loved both ranching and books, surprising everyone by announcing at age 10 that he wanted to be a veterinarian. Emily was bold and adventurous, constantly climbing trees and demanding to learn everything her older brother learned. Samuel was quieter, content to observe and think before acting. In 1887, Zelda was surprised to discover she was pregnant again at 34. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Dr. Morrison warned her to take it easy. Preston was worried, hovering over her constantly until Zelda had to gently but firmly tell him to stop treating her like she was made of porcelain. In early 1888, she gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Rose. The whole family was shocked by the twins, and Zelda spent the first months in a fog of feeding and changing 2 babies instead of 1. But Preston and the older children all helped, and somehow they managed. With 5 children, the rooms above the store had become too small. Preston and Thomas worked together to build a house on the edge of town. A real home with enough bedrooms for everyone and a kitchen large enough for Zelda to cook the massive meals their family required. They moved in just before the twins' first birthday, and Zelda cried when she walked through the door for the first time as the owner. "This is ours," Preston said, putting his arm around her. "Really, truly ours. The house, the store, the ranch partnership, the family. We built all of this together, Zelda. From a suitcase and hope to all of this." As the decade turned and 1890 arrived, Zelda was 47 years old. Her hair had threads of silver now, and her hands showed the work of years running a business and raising children. But she felt strong and capable and deeply content. Matthew was 14 and spending his summers working with the town veterinarian, learning the trade. Emily was 12 and had become an excellent rider, often helping at the ranch. Samuel was 8 and showing a talent for numbers, already helping with the store accounts. The twins were 2, identical in appearance but very different in temperament. Preston was 43, still strong and vital, though he complained sometimes about his knees after long days. His face was weathered from years in the sun, lines around his eyes from squinting and smiling. He was respected in the community, known for his fairness and hard work. One Sunday afternoon, Preston suggested they ride out to the creek, just the 2 of them. Margaret agreed to watch the children for a few hours. It had been years since they had been able to go there alone, and Zelda was surprised by how much she had missed it. They rode slowly, enjoying the warm spring day. The California hills were green from recent rains, and wildflowers dotted the landscape. When they reached the creek, they tied up their horses and sat on the bank in the exact spot where Preston had proposed 14 years earlier. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked. choosing this life instead of staying in Boston or marrying that other man. Never, Zelda said without hesitation. Not even for a moment. Do you regret it? I know this was not exactly what you expected either. Best decision I ever made was picking up your suitcase that day at the train platform, Preston said. I saw you standing there looking brave and scared at the same time, and something in me just knew. You were going to change my life. I am so grateful I trusted that instinct. A suitcase and hope, Zelda said softly, echoing the words that had become their private motto. You told me that was all we needed. You were right. We needed each other too, Preston said. The suitcase and hope were just the starting point. The real magic was us, working together, believing in each other, building something real and lasting. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water flow past. Zelda thought about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the life she had created. It had not been the life anyone expected for her, but it was exactly the life she needed. As they rode back to town in the late afternoon, Zelda looked ahead and saw their house in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney where Margaret was probably cooking supper. She could imagine the children playing in the yard, their voices carrying on the wind. The store would be closed for Sunday, quiet and waiting for tomorrow's business. The ranch spread out beyond town, cattle grazing peacefully. This was her world now. This dusty California town, these people, this family, this man riding beside her. It was a world built on hard work and hope, on love and determination, on the simple belief that sometimes the best things come when you are brave enough to start over with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. Preston reached over and took her hand as they rode, their fingers interlocking with the ease of long practice. Zelda squeezed back, feeling the familiar roughness of his palm against hers. No words were needed. They both knew what they had built together, what they would continue to build for the rest of their lives. And that, Zelda thought with deep satisfaction, was more than enough. It was everything. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing both challenges and joys. In 1892, when Zelda was 49 and Preston was 45, they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from all over the county. Their children performed a little play they had written about their parents' meeting, with Emily dramatically portraying Zelda standing alone at the train station while Samuel, dressed in one of Preston's old hats, heroically came to her rescue. The whole gathering laughed and applauded, and Preston pulled Zelda close and whispered that he would rescue her again any day. Matthew, now 16, announced that year that he had been accepted to a veterinary program in Sacramento. It was the first time one of their children would be leaving home for an extended period, and while Zelda was proud, she was also heartsick at the thought of him being away. Preston reminded her that they had raised him to be independent and to pursue his dreams, just as they had pursued theirs. "He is doing what we did," Preston said as they helped Matthew pack for school. "Going after what he wants, even if it means leaving what is comfortable. That is our legacy, Zelda. Children who are brave enough to hope and to work for what they want." Emily, at 14, had become even more passionate about horses and ranching. She spent every spare moment at the ranch with Thomas, learning everything she could. Thomas treated her like one of his regular hands, which Emily appreciated fiercely. She had no patience for people who thought girls could not do the same work as boys. Samuel, now 10, had taken over a significant portion of the store's bookkeeping, his mathematical mind finding patterns and efficiencies that even Zelda had missed. The twins, Anna and Rose, were 6 years old and attending school, though they spent half their time confusing their teacher by switching places. The store had become one of the largest suppliers in the region, with contracts not just with local ranches but with businesses as far away as Sacramento. Zelda had opened that second location she had dreamed of, in a town 15 miles away, and Sarah managed it with the same competence she had always shown. The business was thriving beyond anything Zelda had imagined in those early days. Preston had become a full partner in the ranch with Thomas, the two brothers working together to expand the operation. They now ran over 1,000 head of cattle and had started breeding horses as a side business. The ranch employed a dozen men year-round and more during busy seasons. Despite their professional success and the demands of raising 5 children, Preston and Zelda had never lost the foundation of their relationship. The deep friendship and love that had started with a simple act of kindness at a train platform. They still talked late into the night when they could, still stole moments alone when possible, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who knew they had found something precious. In 1895, Matthew came home from his studies engaged to a young woman named Helen, a rancher's daughter he had met while treating her family's horses. The wedding was planned for the following summer, and Zelda found herself simultaneously thrilled for her son and nostalgic for the little boy he had been. Emily, now 17, shocked the family by announcing she did not want to get married at all. She wanted to run the ranch someday, to build on what Preston and Thomas had created. Thomas, who had no sons of his own, was delighted by this and began training her even more seriously. The wedding between Matthew and Helen took place in June 1896, a beautiful ceremony that reminded Preston and Zelda of their own wedding years earlier. As they watched their eldest son exchange vows, Preston leaned close to Zelda and said, "We are getting old." "Speak for yourself," Zelda said, but she was smiling. "I prefer to think we are getting experienced. That is a diplomatic way to put it." The turn of the century came with celebration and reflection. On New Year's Eve 1899, moving into 1900, the whole family gathered at Preston and Zelda's house. Matthew and Helen were there with their infant daughter Grace, making Preston and Zelda grandparents for the first time. Emily, now 21 and effectively running half the ranch operations, brought her business ledgers to show her parents the profit margins for the year. Samuel, 17 and preparing to attend university to study business and engineering, talked excitedly about the new century's possibilities. The twins, now 11, performed a song they had learned at school. As midnight approached, Preston pulled Zelda outside onto the porch for a moment of quiet. The night air was cool, and stars filled the sky above Concord. 23 years, Preston said. 23 years since you stepped off that train. 22 years since we married, Zelda added. 5 children, 1 grandchild, 2 thriving businesses, and more blessings than I can count. You remember what I said that first day? A suitcase and hope, that is all we need. I remember everything about that day, Zelda said softly. I was so lost, so uncertain, and then you appeared like something out of a story and you just started helping me. You made it seem like everything would be all right. I felt like I had been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it, Preston admitted. The moment I saw you, something clicked into place, like I had been incomplete and suddenly I was whole. Zelda turned to look at her husband, this man who had picked up her suitcase and her hope 23 years ago and had spent every day since proving that they were enough to build an entire life on. His hair was more gray than brown now, his face deeply lined from years of sun and hard work. But his eyes were the same clear blue that had first captivated her, and when he looked at her, she still felt like the most important person in his world. I love you, she said. I have loved you from almost the beginning, but I love you even more now. You are my best friend, my partner, the father of my children, my everything." "I love you too," Preston said, pulling her close. "You took a chance on me, on this life, on hope itself. You made me believe that anything was possible if two people wanted it badly enough and were willing to work for it." Inside the house, they could hear their family counting down to midnight. 10, 9, 8. Preston and Zelda joined in from the porch, their voices blending with those of their children and grandchild. 3, 2, 1. Cheers erupted as the new century officially began. Preston kissed Zelda as fireworks started going off somewhere in town, bright bursts of color lighting up the night sky. It was a kiss that held 22 years of marriage, of partnership, of working together through challenges and celebrating triumphs. It was a kiss that promised all the years still to come. The first decade of the new century brought changes both expected and surprising. In 1902, Samuel graduated from university and returned to Concord with big plans to modernize both the store and the ranch operations. He implemented new accounting systems, negotiated better shipping contracts, and generally brought an energy and innovation that took the family businesses to new levels. Emily, against all her earlier protestations, fell in love in 1903 with a horse breeder from Nevada named Jack Palmer. He was as passionate about ranching as she was, and they made plans to start their own operation, combining her knowledge and his breeding expertise. They married in a simple ceremony and built a house on land that Thomas and Preston sold them at a steep discount, keeping it in the family. The twins, Anna and Rose, both became teachers, sharing a position at the Concord school. They were beloved by their students and by the community, known for their creative teaching methods and their identical appearances that they still use to their advantage. In 1908, Preston was 53 and Zelda was 55. Preston had slowed down a bit, his knees bothering him more consistently now, but he still rode out to check on the ranch several times a week. Zelda had handed over much of the daily store management to Samuel, but still kept an eye on the business side, unable to fully let go of the enterprise she had built. That year, they took their first real vacation, traveling by train to San Francisco for a week. It was strange and wonderful to have time alone together, to walk through the city streets, to eat in restaurants, to stay in a hotel where someone else made the meals and changed the sheets. They visited the harbor and watched ships coming and going, and Zelda thought about how far she had traveled, both literally and metaphorically, from that fearful young woman leaving Boston. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed?" Preston asked one evening as they watched the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. "Sometimes," Zelda admitted. "I imagine I would have eventually married someone respectable but dull. I would have had a comfortable life, a boring life. I would have died never knowing what I was capable of, never testing myself, never really living." "I am glad you left," Preston said. "So am I. So very, very glad." They returned to Concord refreshed and reconnected, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Matthew and Helen had 3 children now, and Emily and Jack had welcomed a son. The James family was growing, spreading across the region, all of them connected by the foundation that Preston and Zelda had built. In 1912, the family threw a massive party for Preston and Zelda's 30th wedding anniversary. It seemed like half the county turned out for the celebration. Their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends they had made over the decades. Mrs. Fletcher, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, gave a speech about the young woman who had arrived in Concord with nothing and the life she had built. Thomas spoke about his brother and sister-in-law with obvious affection and respect. When it was Preston's turn to speak, He stood up with Zelda beside him and looked out at the gathered crowd. 30 years ago, I married the woman who changed my entire world. She arrived in Concord with nothing but a suitcase and hope, and I told her that was all anyone really needed. I was right, but not for the reasons I thought at the time. What we really needed was each other, the willingness to work together, and the courage to keep hoping even when things got hard. Zelda, you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who was foolish enough to think a suitcase and hope were enough to build a life on. They were enough, Zelda said, standing beside him. They were more than enough because we had each other. That made all the difference. The party continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and laughter. Preston and Zelda danced together, moving slowly to accommodate Preston's knees and their own age, but moving together with the ease of people who had been partners for 3 decades. As the years continued, Preston and Zelda gradually stepped back from active management of their businesses, trusting their children and the capable people they had hired. Preston spent his days riding the ranch boundaries, checking on cattle, and spending time with his grandchildren, teaching them about ranching and life the way his father had taught him. Zelda spent her time reading, tending a garden she had started, and writing in the journal Preston had given her decades earlier, filling volume after volume with the story of their life together. In 1920, they celebrated their 42nd anniversary quietly at home, just the two of them and whatever children and grandchildren could make it. Preston was 65 now, his hair completely white, moving more slowly but still sharp and engaged. Zelda was 67, her own hair silver, her hands showing the arthritis that had plagued Mrs. Hawkins all those years ago. "We have had a good run," Preston said that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "A really good run." "We are not done yet," Zelda protested. "Do not start talking like that." "I am not ready to be done," Preston assured her. "I am just acknowledging that we have been blessed beyond measure. 5 children, all healthy and happy and successful. 8 grandchildren so far with more on the way. Businesses that are thriving. A life that has been rich in every way that matters. All from a suitcase and hope," Zelda murmured. "All from being brave enough to start over," Preston corrected. "All from you taking that leap, getting on that train, coming to a place where you did not know anyone or anything. That took real courage, Zelda. Everything that came after, everything we built, it started with your courage. And your kindness," Zelda added. "You could have walked past me that day at the train station. You could have left me to figure things out on my own. But you stopped, you helped, you cared. That kindness changed everything." They sat together as the sky deepened from orange to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to appear. After all these years, after all the conversations and the shared experiences and the life they had built together, they could still sit in comfortable silence, content just to be in each other's presence. Preston died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925, at the age of 70. Zelda woke one morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still warm in hers. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. They had been together for 47 years, married for 42 of them. He had been her partner in everything, her best friend, her greatest love. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Preston had been respected and loved throughout the region, and people came from miles away to pay their respects. Zelda stood straight and dry-eyed through the service, saving her tears for later, for the private moments when she could grieve without an audience. In the months that followed, Zelda struggled with the hole Preston's death had left in her life. Everything reminded her of him. The house they had built together, the businesses they had created, the children they had raised, the town where they had lived for so long. She was surrounded by reminders of their life together, and every reminder was both a comfort and a fresh wound. But gradually, with the support of her children and grandchildren, Zelda found a new equilibrium. She could not have Preston, but she had everything they had built together. She had their children's love and success. She had grandchildren who carried Preston's eyes, his smile, his way of standing. She had businesses that were thriving. She had a community that had embraced her decades ago and still valued her. She started writing in her journal again, but now she was writing their story. She wanted their children and grandchildren and all the descendants who would come after to know how it had all begun. To know about the young woman with a suitcase and the cowboy who had helped her, and how that simple meeting had changed everything. Zelda lived for another 8 years after Preston's death, passing away quietly in 1933 at the age of 80. She was surrounded by family when she died. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were to Matthew, her eldest. "Tell them about the suitcase and the hope. Tell them that is all anyone ever really needs to start over, to build something beautiful. Tell them about your father and how he taught me that courage and kindness are the foundation of everything worthwhile." Matthew promised, tears streaming down his face, and he kept that promise. The story of Preston and Zelda James became family legend, passed down through generations. The story of how Zelda had arrived in Concord with nothing but a suitcase and hope. How Preston had picked up both and declared that was all they needed. And how they had built an extraordinary life from those simple beginnings. The general store remained in the family for 3 more generations before finally being sold in the 1970s. The ranch expanded and thrived, eventually becoming one of the largest operations in the region, still run by Emily's descendants. Matthew's line produced several veterinarians who served the community. Samuel's children went into business and law. The twins' descendants became teachers and professors. But more than the businesses or the property or the material success, Preston and Zelda's real legacy was the example they had set. They had shown that it was possible to start over with nothing and build something meaningful. That courage and hard work and hope were enough if you had someone to share them with. That love could grow from simple kindness into something that sustained not just 2 people but entire families for generations. The house that Preston and Zelda had built still stood in Concord well into the 21st century, eventually becoming a historical landmark. A plaque outside told the basic facts of their lives. Preston Alexander James, 1860–1925, rancher and businessman. Zelda Marie Kingsley James, 1853–1933, businesswoman and community leader. Married November 1877, 5 children, 8 grandchildren, numerous great-grandchildren, but the plaque could not capture the real story. It could not describe the moment when Preston first saw Zelda standing alone on that train platform and decided to help. It could not explain the weeks of courtship, the quiet Sundays by the creek, the moment when Preston had told her that a suitcase and hope were all anyone needed. It could not convey the 42 years of partnership, of working together through challenges and celebrating triumphs, of raising children and building businesses and creating a life that mattered. That story lived in the family memories, in the journals Zelda had kept, in the photographs and letters and artifacts that had been saved. It lived in the values that had been passed down, the importance of courage, of kindness, of hope. The belief that starting over was not a failure but an act of bravery. The understanding that the best things in life often came from the simplest beginnings. And somewhere, in some way that transcended death and time, Preston and Zelda James were together again. standing on a train platform perhaps, or sitting by a creek, or dancing at a town hall celebration. Wherever they were together as they always should be. The woman with her suitcase and hope, and the man who had picked them both up and proven that they were indeed all anyone ever needed to build something beautiful, something lasting, something real. Their story had ended, as all stories eventually do, but what they had built lived on. In their children and grandchildren and all the generations that followed. In the businesses they had started. In the community they had helped shape. In the simple truth they had proven with their lives. That hope is never foolish, that courage is always worthwhile, and that love built on friendship and mutual respect can sustain not just two people but entire families for generations to come. It was a good ending. It was the ending Preston and Zelda deserved, earned through years of hard work and devotion. An ending that was really just another beginning as their influence rippled forward through time. The suitcase was long gone, its leather worn through decades ago. But the hope it had carried, the hope that Preston had recognized and honored on that dusty platform in 1876, that hope lived on. It always would, as long as there were people willing to be brave enough to start over, to believe in possibilities, to hold on to hope even when the future was uncertain. That, in the end, was the real legacy of Preston and Zelda James, not the businesses or the property or the material success, though those mattered. The real legacy was the proof that hope was enough, that courage mattered, that kindness could change everything. That sometimes the best things came from the simplest beginnings. A train platform, a suitcase, a stranger's helping hand, and the audacious hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out all right after all. And it had. Against all odds, despite every uncertainty, it had turned out better than all right. It had turned out beautifully, wonderfully, perfectly. Just like Preston had known it would from the moment he picked up Zelda's suitcase and her hope, and declared that they were all anyone ever really needed. He had been right. They had proven it together. And that proof, that beautiful, hard-won proof, was the gift they left to everyone who came after them. The gift of knowing that starting over was possible, that hope was worthwhile, that love could grow from kindness, and that the best stories often began with the simplest words. A train left her with just a suitcase and hope. A cowboy picked up both and said that was all they needed. And they had been right.